I'm going to turn now to give you an introduction to our moderator, Stewart Alsop, probably a name very familiar to all of you. Stewart is a general partner at NEA, which he joined in June of 1996. He's currently on 8 boards, I think that's how many I counted, including Boingo Wireless and Full Audio. Stewart's also a columnist for Fortune magazine, so I'm sure you all read his column religiously. I know I do. Prior to NEA, Stewart served as Executive Vice President of InfoWorld, the weekly newsletter for information technology professionals. He also founded Industry Publishing Company, a publisher of a newsletter for computer industry insiders and producer of the Agenda and Demo conferences. Now, this was the context in which I got to know Stewart many years ago, and I can tell you from attending many of those conferences for many years that they were without a doubt the most influential conferences of their time and the place to be where you really figured out what was going on in the industry. Before 1985, Stewart served in several executive editorial positions at business and trade magazines, including Inc., and Stewart received a Bachelor of Arts in English from Occidental College. Stewart has lived and breathed and chronicled the computer industry for over 20 years, and he's making fun of me, too. I won't say anything else nice about him, but instead, I will be very pleased to turn this panel over to Stewart Alsop.
Thank you, Donna. So I was making notes while Donna was talking, and there are no basements in California. Closets, yeah, just to modify your comments there. And I'm on 7 boards, I think, if you count them correctly. But Donna gave a speech at Agenda at my conference. I'm pretty sure it was Agenda, right? At which she was very nervous because her topic was size does matter.
No, wait. Hold on, Stewart. It was size matters, one woman's opinion. Right? Yep.
Very good. So you can see who was paying attention then.
I was trying to get all the pointers I could.
So, and for Eric Hahn, who's sitting here doing his email on his good technology device, Eric, social skills are down the hall. But normally auditoriums are named after dead people, so I just wanted to comment to note that in this case he's still here and actually in the auditorium with us. Yes, feels good to be alive, right? So take yourself back to kind of approximately 1980 to 1985. That's kind of where we want to talk about. These guys were a lot younger. Not me. There was no IBM, not in the personal computer industry, not much of it in Silicon Valley. There was a little operation in doing the Winchester drive, but IBM was not in the computer business. The primary computers were Commodore, Apple, Atari, Radio Shack. I think that was the top 4. And in fact, this building didn't exist. There was probably a fruit orchard here, although it's awfully close to the freeway, which was here at the time. And but that's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about the consumer software industry as it was being born. But we're not going to be particularly serious. So if you're here to like study, write papers or anything like that, relax. And I want to find out in the audience here how many people were working in the computer industry before 1985. Okay.
Okay. Stewart, how many were in consumer?
Yeah, well, hang on. We're going to work our way through this here. I couldn't count that fast. How many people were not in the computer industry before 1995? It's about 20%. Okay, and all of those that put their hands up the first time, how many of you were employed, gainfully or not, in the consumer software industry? Bad. There's not much wiggle room here.
Yeah.
So come on up and join the panel.
So the reason I was getting it and add it on a little bit is I'm not going to give that kind of introduction here because you're going to get to know these guys. But if you don't, well, you do already, actually, as far as I can tell. But working from your right, Scott Cook is the co-founder, with Tom Proul. Did I pronounce his name right? Proul, yeah, I always get that wrong. Tempted to call him Proulx. But Scott is the co-founder of Intuit, which is now, I don't know, 1-point-something billion, 7 billion last year. And your revenues are going up fast, and it, according to One Business magazine, has the hottest CEO in Silicon Valley. Not Scott.
Not me. We hired somebody who knew what they were doing.
Yeah. And other details will come out as we go along here. Doug Carlston is the co-founder of Broderbund software.
Very good.
Well done.
Yeah, well, you trained me. And he's not any longer at Broderbund Software. There is still a Broderbund Software, but it's owned by something called River Green or
River Deep.
River Deep,
Yeah.
which is a bunch of bankers.
I think that's fair.
So, so we'll hear more about Doug. Actually, someone came up to me and said that he heard that either you or your brother was the coach of the Swedish women's rowing team or
Basketball
team.
Yeah.
We'll get back to that. So they're a wonderful source of information. And last but not least is Trip Hawkins, who is the founder of both Electronic Arts and 3DO. And again, we'll get into some of the details going forward. So I went back and looked in my newsletter, and Scott, I couldn't find anything. Did I never write about you?
No, you never did.
Oops. Now, Dave. But I did write this in 1986, in December of 1986. So it's looking back a little bit. And this is quote unquote. Now that we're well into the ever so anticipated Christmas selling season of 1986, which in parentheses, which is supposed to be a banner year in the annals of the home computer business, I thought it worth considering the question of whether home and school software developers will ever make a decent living.
We were all wondering the same thing.
Yes, we were.
Now, to be totally honest, I was using the word developer specifically because I was talking about people who actually wrote software as opposed to the people that published software, because at this time there were several publishers making a decent living, and the question was were the people that they were sucking the energy, that they were... And at the time, this was what was really interesting. The statistics that I cited in this were average sales per title for a successful publisher were 30,000 units. And a hit was 50,000 units.
That's per what?
Per title. For the life.
Oh, lifetime?
Over the lifetime of the title. So it seems familiar, right? Right, Doug?
That's about right.
About Trip? And a monster hit, the one that really made a lot of money, was 200,000 units. So I don't know, what's the current number for just PC games? Trip?
Well, actually, sad to say, the number was maybe a couple 100,000 units as the market average a few years ago. But lately, it's been actually, unfortunately, very close to the numbers you just said.
Oh, we've made a lot of progress.
The market's been a little messed up lately.
But bigger for video for console games.
Well, certainly, hits can do 1 million units or more.
1 million units or more. So that's games, of course, and then we'll get to the productivity titles in a minute. So I was getting ready for this, and I noticed that all three of our panelists, but not our moderator, graduated from Harvard.
Was that true?
Scott has an MBA from Harvard. Doug couldn't get enough of it, has both a bachelor's and a what's it called, it's a JD, the law thing. The law thing. And Trip has a bachelor's in strategy and applied game theory. Mm-hmm. And so, first of all, see what an Ivy League education can do for you.
Don't go to Harvard.
That's right. You can be called Jurassic someday.
And abused on stage in front of a willing crowd. So, first question is, what were you thinking of when you started a consumer software company? And I'm going to start with Doug because he was the first one to go with Broderbund in 1980.
It was an accident. You recall, my brother was a girls' basketball coach in Sweden, and he had decided he couldn't stand the Swedish winters. There's only about 45 minutes of sunlight, and so he came back.
That's per month.
That's about right. He came back, and I had been practicing law and writing software to amuse myself up in the backwoods of Maine, and he started selling it. So we accidentally ended up doing this because it was a heck of a lot more fun than worrying about, who owned the potato shed in the back 40 up in Newport, Maine.
Okay. We'll come back to that. So Tripp was next in 1982. So what came over you?
Well, actually, for me, it started in 1975 because I was working for a big think tank in Santa Monica, and a coworker came back from lunch and told me he had just visited a computer store. And I said, "What are you talking about?" And this is a store that a guy named Paul Heiser, I forget his name. This
Bernard?
is literally the first computer store. It's in Santa Monica, California. I think it was Paul Heiser that started it.
Sounds familiar.
And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, you can actually rent a KSR 33 and you can take it home and have it in your house for $10 a month." And I was going, "Whoa, that is so cool!" And that just completely blew my mind. And then he said, "But that's not all. I just read about this company Intel that put a computer on a chip." So that just completely blew my afternoon.
75.
I went back to my desk and I could get no work done. I started thinking, okay, so they're going to be home computers. When will there be enough of them that I can make the games? And I sat there and I said, okay, it's going to take 7 years. In 1982, I can start a company. Now, he was a lot smarter because he figured out you could do it 2 years earlier.
Profitably.
We thought we were too late. We went to the first computer show at Brooks Hall in San Francisco, the West Coast Computer Fair. Walked in, there were thousands of booths, and my brother turned to me and said, "Oops. Boy, we missed this one."
Well, I was there also, and I did notice that there was a certain amateurism to a lot of them, and so it struck me that there was still some opportunity there.
Apparently.
Okay, Scott, 1984. Actually, the program was introduced in 1984, so the company was founded in
83.
83. A year's worth of programming. Visual Basic.
Oh, what was in our what was that?
What were you thinking of?
My wife asked me the same question. And that's actually the Signe, my wife, is right down there knitting in the second row. And that's actually the start of the company because she was working for a software company, software publishing, has one of the old boxes downstairs. And one day she complained about doing the bills. And she pays the bills for the family. And I thought, ding, wait a minute, this sounds like the classic kind of Procter & Gamble problem that we got trained to solve when both of us worked in Cincinnati. Find something that everybody does. For them it's like wash clothes or use deodorant or have teeth. And then find some problem that you can solve in what everybody does. And in this case, everybody does financial work. She certainly had a problem with it, though she was very good at it. She didn't like doing it. And then find technology that can solve that problem really well. And computers are really good. They're lousy at lots of things, especially in 1982 when this idea came up. But they're very good at numbers and data. And it sounded like there was a fit between the problem and what computers can do. So I said, I think I'll write something to help this. I think I can probably write it in 3 weekends. Of course, I hired people to write it, and it took 18 months. So there was a little bit of dissonance between the plan and the reality. But it all started because of Signe's complaint.
So it'll be easy to ask you this question, so I'll start with you, Scott, because the first part of the question is obvious. What was the first product your company introduced? But which computer did it run on, and how many copies did it sell? And while he's answering, you guys can remember what.
Well, I knew we weren't the strongest technology shop, and so we went on the IBM PC first, because it had the most headroom for us to build lousy code.
But you introduced the product in 84, and the
84.
PC didn't come out until 85.
No, it was out. It was out.
It was?
Yeah. 81.
I told you there wouldn't be much wiggle room.
So we were on the IBM PC.
Oh, yes,
units.
you're right.
I don't remember the units, but we stuck with that version for a lot of years because we didn't have the money to make a new one. I mean, we sold that thing up till '97, so
No memory.
yeah, I'd have to, you know,
Tens?
I bet you over the whole, by '87 we probably had 100,000 units sold, but only because we sold it longer than anyone else would have. It wasn't the volume per month; it was the number of months that we were selling.
Okay, Doug?
Well, there's two answers. One, the first program we tried to sell and achieved lifetime sales of 0 was actually...
Like that kitchen computer downstairs.
Yeah, it was called Food Cost Explosion. And it was a program that somebody had created up in Eugene,
Food
Oregon
Cost
for
Explosion?
fast food restaurants to separate out their costs. And we thought we were a natural to sell that. The first one we successfully sold was a program I had written on a few weekends to entertain my siblings. It was called Galactic Empire. I think it was written in BASIC for the Trash 80. And I have no idea what it sold lifetime. Back then, people, including we, were not smart enough to ask for exclusive rights to software. So before we started Broderbund, I had already licensed that program to 3 different publishers, all of whom published it, apparently without any sense of conflict. So when my brother Gary said, well, if they can do it, why can't I publish it too? I said, sure, go ahead. You've got a special advantage. You know when the next one's coming out. And I would guess it probably sold among all 4 publishers something like 20,000 copies.
That's pretty good, actually, at the time. Almost a hit.
Yeah, I think it sold for about $12, too.
You can do the math. So, Trip, which one was the first one at Electronic Arts?
We actually had a little bit of a group, but the best known from that group would be Pinball Construction Set by Bill Budge.
Bill Budge.
Yeah.
And that actually, it's hung around for a lot of years on a lot of different platforms, so it probably ended up doing hundreds of thousands of units. But of course, in the very beginning, it was on the Apple II and the Atari 800, and probably did 50,000 units on each, something like that.
God, Pinball Construction Set was a classic. How many people know what Pinball Okay, how many people know what the Trash 80 is?
I'll tell you the other thing that I remember is that one of the other games in that group is called Hard Hat Mac for the Apple II. And what I remember about that is what it cost to make the game. It cost $14,000.
Good through the nose, huh?
And who got that money?
A guy named Mike Abbott.
Was that programmed offshore, like in the East Bay?
Today you can blow your nose for $14,000.
You can't blow your nose for $14,000, actually, because the other statistic, which I didn't cite, was that in my little thing there about whether developers make money, is that an expensive game was $80,000 to $100,000.
Ah, you see.
And now I'm pretty sure that the budgets for games that EA puts out, and I don't know if it was true for 3DO or certainly for Activision and THQ, et cetera, is sort of in the $3 to $5 million or more.
More.
Yeah. It's like a cheap movie, actually. But, so you cited, Doug, going to the West Coast Computer Fair, and you were too late. So what were you wrong about? Why weren't you too late?
I think we didn't realize the extent to which companies were going to emerge and disappear. I mean, the pace was so unbelievably horrendous that even the giants that were there, giant corporations like VisiCorp, 3 years later were basically distant memories. I have particularly fond memories of VisiCorp because I first met the founder, Dan Filestrip, when he was in his dorm room at the Harvard Business School selling Microchess 1.5 out of the room. And since I was in Boston, I asked if I could just drop by the corporate offices and pick up a copy. And he said no. And I finally persuaded him, and he slipped me one through a slot in the door, I suppose so I wouldn't see the unmade beds. And I realized that, the edifice that you see out there has nothing to do with what's going on behind those closed doors. But then they grew into a corporate giant. I believe McGraw-Hill made an offer of several $100 million for the company 4 months before it folded its doors.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that detail. In fact, they grew into an edifice. I'm trying to remember the building they were in North First Street in San Jose. Anyway. So if any of you want to ask a question, feel free, because this is pretty loose, and you've got three of the founders of the consumer software business. Just want to let you know that it's okay. Yeah? Is it a good one? Can you all hear me now? So you're having trouble hearing in the back?
Oh.
Thank you very much. Now, is that true of all of us, or was I just mumbling?
Yeah, okay.
So audio? If anybody has control over the audio. So we're doing a beta test here, right? It's the first time ever? So this is very important you give us feedback. Are you raising your hand or are you stretching?
What were your early thoughts about the Macintosh?
You're not asking me that, I'm sure. And, well, I'll start with Trip. So what were your early thoughts about the Macintosh? What were your thoughts about the Macintosh when it was introduced?
Well, one of my earliest thoughts was that Steve was in denial because he thought he could sell the machine with 128 kilobytes of RAM. And I kept trying to convince him.
Now, you guys be able to hear this? Okay. So we're going to have to pick them off and talk to you.
Mic up. Yeah, get that help.
You're just talking.
Well, I can talk real loud. It's never been a problem.
They like that.
Anyway, I was actually working at Apple when the Mac was developed, and Steve had.
Hold it up to your mouth.
Better to hold it.
Testing, 1, 2.
So you need more volume in your mics.
Okay, so I was actually working at Apple when the Mac was developed, and Steve thought it could be sold with 128 kilobytes of RAM, which I didn't think was going to work. And we had this ongoing argument about how much RAM it would need and how much RAM would cost at the time that it would come out. And of course, it launched with not enough RAM, and that got corrected, and eventually it went on to have a great life. But obviously, it was an incredibly sexy machine. I think everybody knew that.
And did you do games? I'm trying to remember. Did you do games for the Mac?
You know, there never has been, never was, and never will be a big market for games on the Mac. Sorry. If you're a Mac lover, I'm sorry.
Who disagrees with that?
You don't buy enough games. Sorry.
Nobody disagrees with that. Okay, well, there's that fellow over there disagrees with it. Are you disagreeing, or you want to ask a question? Okay, disagreeing. So next over is Doug, Scott. Don't be shy. Come on.
If we expand the question to include the Lisa, it had a major impact on our company because I was working in a consulting firm at the time. I was moonlighting to create Intuit, and one of the guys who left the consulting firm went to Apple, and before the Lisa was launched, he pulled me into a back room at Apple to show me this new computer. And it was phenomenal. It was eye-opening. The whole idea of using the visual appearance to replicate things in the real world. So I drove out of there after seeing the Lisa at night into the Big Boy restaurant that used to be on the street there and took notes, just stopped so I could take notes about all the stuff I'd seen. And then we piled that into the design of Quicken and changed the design to be entirely as graphical as you could in the 80-column IBM mono screen. But still, to make the emphasis on making the picture look as much as you could like the real thing, and that was an essential element of the easy use that we had, which I just typed right from the Lisa.
So Steve got it from Xerox, and you got it from Steve.
Yeah, right. And I paid him the same royalty that he paid Xerox.
Actually, I've heard that software is supposed to be free.
But it is, software ideas, the royalty is, yeah.
Doug. So Doug did support the Macintosh early on, if I remember.
We did a lot of Macintosh. We weren't really free agents because we were publishing product that other people had developed. We were developing a very small part of the software internally. And so it was largely a function of what machines people had programmed for and what they wanted to do. Our argument to the developers who came in with PC versions of product, or Apple II, which is where we started, was that they shouldn't be religious about what format they did stuff for. They should simply look in terms of what their expectations for sales were. And the research we'd done showed that the average Mac owner owned almost 10 times as many products as the average PC owner. And if you looked at average daily usage, it was also in that 8 to 10 times number, which meant that you just tended to get much higher penetration. And so we moved all the products we had control over onto the Mac early on, and we also found that it was a very good development community in terms of sourcing new stuff. So in fact, through much of the 80s, a lot of our product was going the other way.
In fact, did Print Shop start on the Mac?
Now, Print Shop actually started on the Apple II.
Apple II.
Yeah.
So I think Apple's marketing department got hold of that research, because I remember them, proclaiming that Mac owners owned 10 times as much software.
Yeah, but they pay for a lot of it.
I mean, the research or the...
This was equally true in Hong Kong.
So you're basically saying that, how many people here use the Macintosh? So you're basically saying that Macintosh users are pirates.
No, it's just computer users.
Oh.
Or pirates.
Or pirates in general.
Present company excluded, of course.
Okay, so you guys, you guys invented the consumer software industry. It's what we're at least maintaining here. What was the first? I've been trying to figure out how to ask this question, because I could say, what's the first home computer? But what was the first consumer computer? What was the first computer that really, delivered on its promise to consumers, as opposed to being a repurposed business machine or a repurposed educational machine?
I'd go for the Commodore 64.
Yeah.
It was a terrible machine, admittedly.
I mean, it's hard to decide between the Atari 400, the Commodore VIC, the Apple II, and the TRS-80 Model 1. I mean, none of them was decent business machines, so ipso facto, they had to be consumer machines.
But, I'm picking the Commodore 64 because it's the first one that created a meaningful market for software.
It was a good market.
I don't know. I'd go with the Apple II. You could make a business on Apple II software, and you could also run a business on an Apple II software.
At least with VisiCalc, yeah.
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 So I did further research into my newsletter, and as we've observed, Scott didn't appear in my newsletter, so that'll be a different topic. But I did write what I called company reviews of both Broderbund Software and Electronic Arts, and I wrote the review of Broderbund in July of 1985, and
You're not going to read that.
I'm going to read the best line in it. Are you still sensitive about that? So Doug was a subscriber at the time, I'm pretty sure.
I think I paid through the nose.
If not, he became a subscriber shortly afterwards. The line I pulled out is, Doug Carlston is probably at once the company's greatest strength and greatest weakness. So you're still kind of sensitive about that?
Oh, you covered all your bases.
That's the key to being a great analyst, is so bracketing all the possibilities. And I said you should get a company runner. You should make more hay about the company, and whatever you do, don't go public. Now, I know you didn't go public, at least independently of being acquired by a public company, but what do you think of my opinion at the time?
Well, we were actually public for 8 years before we were acquired, but that was in the 90s,
right?
so you may have missed it.
You were? How soon they forget. Notice I refer to myself in the royal we.
That was good.
That's good.
Actually, your article was, I noticed, was posted prominently all throughout Broderbund with different sections of that sentence underlined or highlighted according to people's individual views of.
And so, what was the net outcome of that? Were you voted in or out?
A contingent of two contingents actually came to me. One came from marketing and asked that I stop wearing blue jeans with holes in the knees because it would give the company a more professional image. And a group of the senior managers came and said they thought it was time that we hire a CEO.
I see that you're not wearing blue jeans with holes in them anymore.
Yeah, I don't fit in them anymore.
So that was kind of a lead-in, a setup to, in starting Broderbund and creating that company. What was the biggest thing you learned? Whether that's about consumer software or not. But what's the biggest thing you got out, or biggest challenge? It's an open-ended question.
Oh, I think it's clear that having a really limited sense of your own limitations is enormously useful, because if you knew then what you know now, you would never have done it. Based on
your experience, then you would not have started Broderbund if you had perfect knowledge going forward?
I would have.
Oh, come on.
Oh,
you
no.
Still would have.
I had a wonderful time. It was great. I have a clearer sense of how much I didn't know at the time. And at the time, I really thought that was a very small a factor. And looking back on it, of course, now that I look around, I realize that was probably true of everybody.
That was crucial to understanding that. We'll see. So in my review of Electronic Arts, I actually said exactly the same thing about Tripp. So I decided it wouldn't be interesting to ask Tripp exactly the same question. However, there was this mantra that Tripp used to use all the time with Electronic Arts, which was simple, hot, and deep. And do you remember that? Oh yeah. And so, is it still true? And what did you learn about simple, hot, and deep from actually starting a company around that?
It's absolutely true.
Explain it too. So.
It's just a principle of good software design, and I started learning about it when I was at Apple. And the idea is that you have to imagine that the people that are going to use technology are everyday people that may not have ever used it before. So instead of assuming you're designing for somebody like yourself, assume that you're designing for someone that's touching the equipment for the first time. So it has to be as simple as possible. Like we ran some tests at Apple where we wanted to get people to take a machine out of a box and produce a document in 20 minutes. And it was just good discipline thinking about the problem that way. And then the idea of hot is that we were making entertainment software. You want to use all of the audiovisual capabilities of the technology to present the fantasy, if you will, in the most compelling way that you can. And then it should have depth. Basically like the ocean has depth. When you go to the beach, you see little children playing in the sand. You see older children out playing in the waves. You see people out surfing. You see scuba divers going out, sinking into the depths of the water. Basically, you should let people go into it at whatever depth that they want to go into it.
And so, do you think we've succeeded now as an industry in making simple, hot, and deep?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah?
I think so.
So what would you point to as a product that you were not responsible for that would embody the principles of simple, hot, and deep?
I think there's quite a few of them. For example, in the gaming industry, a lot of the best video games, there are so many of them, it's hard to fixate on one that would be a particularly good example.
Doom, maybe?
I'm sorry?
Doom?
Sure.
Simple, hot, and deep.
QuickBooks.
QuickBooks.
Hey, be fair, it's true. Maybe you don't think your checkbook that way, but
not as simple as I want.
Yeah, and mine isn't as deep as I'd like.
So I thought QuickBooks came out too late for you to run Broderbund on it.
Yeah, I think we probably could have for a few years if it had existed. Absolutely.
So instead you ran it on Quicken, like, what, 90% of business out there? Isn't that, what was the statistic about how many companies ran on Quicken?
Well, it's still true today. More companies run on Quicken than any other software on the planet.
Did you hear that?
About 3.1 million.
Wow.
We have a question in the back with a microphone.
Hi. Actually, you guys still need to speak a little bit louder. But the question I want to ask is about like simple, hot, and deep and ease of use. That I think a lot of companies still don't look and build their software that way. Games is an exception, I guess, but a lot of consumer software is still, not easy to use, not intuitive, not, very well developed. And so I'm just wondering why you think that's the case, or if you agree.
Actually, I think a lot of games are still too complicated. And I think the problem is we have too much technology, and designers feel obligated to use it all. And they just don't want to simplify it. Even when I was at Apple, keep going back to those days, but as I know Larry Tesler's here, and he remembers the debates we would have about such topics as how many buttons should be on the mouse. And I remember a couple of the guys from Xerox PARC who wanted to have 6 buttons on the mouse. And their argument was that bartenders could do it. Those devices where they can get all the different kinds of alcohol out of that joystick? They say, well, the bartenders can do it, so of course the people who use this are going to want to do it. And of course we went with 1 button because then there would be no question for the user about what button do I press. It's a simple idea.
My mouse has 6 buttons on it. I don't use a Macintosh anymore, I'm sorry. Right here.
Suggestion on the sound, you need to hold the microphone kind of below your chin because there's no windscreen on those. That's what's getting you there. You're getting your breath noise.
Do we have a room full of engineers or what? Try it back on the lapel. Okay, they boosted. Be like that? Is that the wind that you're talking about? Okay, now, for the back row, can you hear me talk right now? It's the air conditioning, okay. So it's a little hot up here, and I'm already beginning to sweat, so please don't turn off the air conditioning. Where were we? Would somebody actually want to ask a question? Is that gentleman wanting to ask a question, or that lady, or she want to complain about the microphone?
Hi, does anyone here have any words of encouragement for people who are in educational software design that are just a blast out of the blue? How does someone get to the next step?
So one thing you need to know is that Doug was on the board of an organization that I tried to start with a lady named Ruth Ann Quinlan called the Foundation for Educational Software. So I happen to know that he's got long and deep experience in that particular topic and has introduced programs that a lot of teachers use in the classroom. So Doug.
I don't know whose mic that is. The question is whether there's any hope for the future.
Actually, she asked you.
Right. How does a woman break into a
Actually, Doug, if I heard the question correctly, she was asking for words of encouragement because she's slaving away.
So you should say yes.
We were getting there. Actually, I think there are a number of things that are very encouraging, particularly for educational software, and I think one of the biggest ones, although it's going to take a long time to get there, is the move toward open source. Because if you look at a gifting environment, it's the academic environment, and in the long run, and it's going to take a long time, you're going to find an environment where contributions for lots of people can augment one another, and I think that's going to have a profound impact on the quality of educational software. If the question is whether there's a good outcome for an educational software company in the marketplace right now, honesty compels me to say that this is a very, very tough market for trying to sell educational software, and the people that are doing it are having a dickens of a time, both because retail is not doing very well and because stores' budgets or schools' budgets are under a lot of pressure right now. That's a short-term problem. I think in the long term, computers are still the best educational tool that has ever been invented, and they're going to have a profound impact on the education of kids. The problem right now in schools is that the kids are getting access to software, and a lot of it is 10, 15 years old. And a lot of it are names of products that were introduced in the 80s and 90s just because budgetary constraints are keeping schools from reinvesting in modern software. I wish they could, and I hope that they will be able to in the future.
So actually, it's a pretty good. This is a pretty good intro. Can you hear me now in the back? To asking the question. You know, you guys all started out actually when there was a retail channel for software, and I assume Intuit's revenue is what, 80%, or well, maybe less if you include the consumables, but some very large portion of it is retail, and I know the games business basically survives on retail distribution, which is a real well, anyway, what's the state of distributing consumer software? I mean, it's almost like we should have a panel in another 20 years going, you know, there's another generation. There's no kids in this room. They must be out writing programs, but you know, what is the state of consumer software at this point?
Well, actually, I was going to say, I think you're mistaken if you think there was a channel at that time, because Atari blew up. And when Atari went down...
Just hold it down a little bit so you don't...
When Atari blew up and Atari went down, all of the retailers carrying video games either went out of business or they stopped carrying games.
All right.
And there was nobody there. I mean, you know, today there are specialty retailers that only sell software, but there was no such thing at the time. There were a few guys like Computerland, that is franchises, which of course were selling a few games, but they really were. That's not really what they were focused on. The channel kind of had to be built, and over the course of the 1980s, it got built, and it took a decade to do it.
All right. So, but going forward, what is? I mean, right now, I think the retail distribution channel for software is owned by Walmart.
Yeah, well, there's several major retailers. You have Walmart, Target, Toys R Us, Best Buy, GameStop, Electronics Boutique. Those are the kind of big guys you have out there.
Yeah, I can see Scott winding up here.
Yeah, Stewart, given that we expected our software Quicken would be built in 6 months, and it actually took 18 months, and since I wasn't the programmer, we had people who graduated from Stanford who knew how to do that. I had lots of time to go understand the channel, and so I called on a lot of retailers and asked them, like, how do I get my software in here and how do I sell software? And I remember a retailer in Los Angeles, a guy who owned one store, and he had his office in the back of the store with a big plate glass window between his office and the store. We were in his office, and he said, son, this was at the time when people would call me son.
Now they call you Dad.
If I'm lucky. You see that bin out there, that markdown software at 10% of its original price? That's the software that I bought. I don't buy software anymore. I wait till customers come in and demand it. Then and only then do I stock it. And that is the secret to retail. Retail is a rope. You can pull it, but you can't push it. And that was as true then as it is now. If you have a lot of demand, retail's easy. We have great retail relations. They're wonderful. But if you don't have demand, or if we have a SKU that people don't want, it's hell. So it's all about generating end-user demand first, and the retail channel is merely fulfillment. They don't sell anything. They just fulfill demand.
Yes, I can see you want to ask a question. I do too, but okay. You go. Make it good, though.
In 1983, 1984, 1985 was the first great fallout in the personal computer industry. Many companies went out of business, many software developers went out of business, many stores closed, and at least a few major manufacturers reached the conclusion that there was no market for entertainment or personal computers, that it was dead. It was the Cabbage Patch doll phenomenon. That's what I heard at the time. How did this affect your thinking and your planning as you created your companies then, and what lessons does that bring forward to the present day in the situation we're in today?
Yeah, Trip referred to Atari going out of business, but it was also the death of CPM, and you know, Commodore kind of went left, and Apple sort of survived, but the PC came along, and there was that huge valley between the old and the new.
Well, it depended on what basis you were on. We were still very heavily Apple II, Mac, and PC, and honestly, those were pretty good years for us. We had good growth there, and when we heard that, it reminded me of that congressman in 1896 who wanted to abolish the patent office because pretty much everything had been invented. And I don't know how many times in the last 20 years people have come up and said, do you really think there's anything else left to do with software? Hasn't it pretty much all been done? And, I mean, the failure of imagination sometimes staggers me. But like any other business, it's going to have its ups and downs.
Yeah. So you have to believe.
It had a dramatic effect on us because I kind of created the idea, and the idea that, we'd go out and get venture capital in the boom time of 1983. But I figured, me and Tom, we don't know how to do this, so let's build some of the product first. Then we'll go get venture capital in '84. Unfortunately, the venture capital for software evaporated by 1984. There was no money at all unless you were into a really hot field with a great future, certain future of AI software. Those guys raked in big VC bucks in '84, IntelliCorp and other well-known corporations. But nobody had patience for checkbook software in the venture capital community in 1984, so we totally struck out. Not a single VC would invest because of this crash that had happened at the end of '83, beginning of '84.
So what advice would you give to entrepreneurs that, by some reports, are facing a similar situation right now?
Luck matters more than skill in venture capital financing.
Well,
That helps.
being a venture capitalist, of course, you're not referring to me.
No, I'm just glad you didn't write any articles about us, given what you said about Doug. For the first time in my professional career, I'm glad you didn't write on us.
Okay, back here. Go ahead and stand up, speak into the mic. Now you're going to have to yell.
This is
Mic's not
revenge.
working.
It's the revenge of the back of the audience.
Turn it on.
Now he's going to take it apart, see what's wrong with it.
Do you know ASL?
Want mine?
Yeah, EV is hard.
Okay.
Check.
Oh.
Okay. I'm not sure you began developing the Might and Magic series before '85, but I just want to say that I really, really, really like Heroes of Might and Magic and got tons of people hooked on it. But what's the idea behind making long series of software? I know corporations and business software do it. They make 50 versions of the same program. But with Might and Magic, they're up to 9 or 10 now. What's the idea behind that? I know Blizzard was gotten on because they were doing that and some people didn't like it, but it's kind of been successful for the Might and Magic series.
I think it's a simple idea that all of us can relate to. It's branding. I mean, Batman is 60 years old, Barbie's 40 years old, Star Wars is 25 years old. I mean, there's all kinds of brands in entertainment now, and this is true with consumer packaged goods and business software. A brand has meaning, and if it's an entertainment brand, it can be about a fantasy world with heroes and villains, and there's no reason why that has to go away. I mean, you can keep updating the story and adding new features to the gameplay, doing different genres of gameplay. And people have an emotional attachment to it, so they'd rather go back to a place that they love, that they're familiar with. I mean, frequently people want to try something new also, but once it's got a place in your heart, then it's a good thing to continue to develop.
So, and let's just follow that up, because Tripp introduced a product called Madden Football, which really kind of proved a whole different way of doing business. And maybe you could just talk about how you found that and started it, because there's actually a pretty good history to Madden Football.
Well, I think this is true with a lot of the software that we've all developed, is that if you have a personal passion for it, it makes a big difference. And that project was known as Tripp's Folly.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to take a year to make it, and it took 4 years to make the first version, and everyone thought it should be killed, and the auditor said we had to write off the advance to Madden, we were never going to recoup it, and it was quite a struggle. I mean, it took that brand probably 6 or 7 years of life before it really took off, and in a way it had to progress, and it also had to eventually match up with the right kind of hardware.
Right. But now it's a significant piece of EA's. Well, the sports franchise.
It's been billions of dollars.
Yeah.
You see, that was always my weakness, because these guys understand brand, and I always got bored with products after the first one. I hated sequels in the movie industry, and I swore we weren't going to do it. I thought it was a failure of imagination, that people should go out and do something completely new, and the marketing people said I was an idiot. They had a point.
So along the lines of confessional, Trip, what was the stupidest thing you did at Electronic Arts? Because I think I know what the answer is, but I'll see if we
Well, the most fun one to mention would be the Timothy Leary thing, but I'm sure that's not what you're thinking. You're probably thinking Get Organized.
Actually, no, I was thinking of you kind of went on a religious crusade against video games, if I remember correctly. You really went...
Oh, okay, you're not talking about a specific product.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
well,
so...
the same way that...
Well, Doug would probably agree with this because I think we both viewed the original Nintendo with disdain.
We hated the deal. They were going to own the razor blades, and we were going to work for them.
Hated the deal. So, well, just speak up, because...
We couldn't fight him. We had to join him eventually. But, yeah, we got that one wrong.
That's right. And the deal was that Nintendo... remind me exactly what the specifics were. They basically...
well, they invented that razor blade model. I mean, they invented the model that's common in video games today where the hardware company controls the technology as an IP. They keep it confidential, and you're not allowed to make software for it as an open public domain platform, and they charge very high royalties per unit, and then they use that to subsidize the sale of the hardware at lower prices. And Nintendo deserves a lot of credit for having invented a really clever business model and doing a great job developing it.
But well, anyway, that's a different topic, but it's not a game business.
So I'm interested in decision processes early in industries. Can you talk about surprises? That is either the form of surprise where something you thought about and didn't think would happen turned out to leap up and happen, or something you really expected to happen and then it didn't.
Well, I think our biggest surprise was the video game industry, because I hated this deal so much I sold the video game division, which in retrospect was a really stupid thing to do. But I was sure that this model was one that people just weren't going to buy, and that it was going to be knocked out by the open format that the PCs had. And then looking back on it, if we hadn't done that, we probably would have stayed in games.
Scott?
Two. One negative surprise. In 81, 82, if you had software that was good, you just got a few reviews on it, and it got pulled from you. Bank Street Writer, PFS File. That was the model that I began with, but by the time we got our product out in 84, the channel was stuffed with product. And we got a couple good reviews, and nothing happened. And so that was a huge downer and almost killed us. The other surprise was the one that was alluded to earlier. We built a home product, Quicken, sold it in a garish orange box, looked like a little like a Tide box, and found out that half the users were businesses and ignored it. And years later, did the research again, half the users were businesses, ignored it. Finally, in 1988, we started to call some of those business users to ask, why are you using a home product? And that's what that surprise led to what is our largest business today, which is making business accounting software. Because it turns out accounting is so darn hard, people were buying a home product to avoid having to learn debits and credits. So that was a huge upside surprise. No, I've joked about this many times, but when you actually talk to people who run businesses, small businesses, they don't have CPAs. These are the people who think the General Ledger was a World War II hero. So
I don't know, Scott. I'm sitting here listening to it. You're a very successful businessman, but you started out as the consumer, research guy who just, went to town on research, and you couldn't raise venture capital, and your first product was a flop, and you didn't succeed until you listened to the consumers. You had something to say, Trip?
Yeah.
Actually, I was just going to echo what they both said. I'll state it a little bit differently, but I think a lot of us thought there was a real thing called a home computer, and it turned out there wasn't. The market split, and it split into one device that's really not a medium. The computer in the home is an appliance, and it's an appliance that's used for work, it's used for business applications, it's used to do productive things. And then there was another device that went in a different place in the house that was an entertainment medium. And, I think for a long time we really thought there really was going to be this home computer. There was going to be this ubiquitous device that was going to do everything. And it just really did not work out that way.
Go right here. John?
I was wondering if you could share some of your experiences with copy protection.
Yeah, it doesn't work. That's the problem with copy protection.
But it's fun for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And some people have to learn this lesson, again, very late in their life. That it doesn't work, and we're ripping it out of TurboTax so we won't have all the problems next year.
Boy, I'm clueless, Scott. I'm sorry. Maybe you could fill me in. You actually put copy protection back on a program?
Yeah. We may be the slowest to learn in the industry, but we put copy protection on last fall onto TurboTax and announced last month that we were removing it because it was such a failure and it caused so many problems.
And what was the theory behind it?
The theory or the reality? Well, TurboTax does have a special problem in that it's a use-once product. So unlike a lot of products where you want to keep it around, you use it once, you print it out, you file your return, you're done. So it goes around offices like wildfire. And we have, one of our people got a call this tax season from a friend of his in Chicago saying, well, you got me. And our guy said, what? He said, well, I used to be the guy who'd buy the TurboTax for the 10 neighbors on the street. And now with the thing you put in, we're each buying TurboTax. And we have reports of an investment bank who would install it on 100 computers for all the employees, one copy, for all the employees. And this, one of the guys, actually the guy who runs our TurboTax unit, worked at a company where the CIO of the division would buy one copy and they'd go from cubicle to cubicle installing it. So that's the unique problem that TurboTax has, that we were trying to fight with copy protection. But it causes so many problems that we've given up. We're back to.
I seem to remember that problem back in the early 80s. When did you remove copy protection from your products, or did you ever have it?
No, I think we had copy protection up into the 90s on at least some of the products. Basically, there was a point at which, pretty much contiguous with the CD market coming on, where it didn't make that much sense. There was a big gap between when CDs became the medium for 98% of our users and when they developed the capability of making CD copies.
Right.
And it made the issue go away for 5 years, 6 years, and we hadn't been that wild about copy protection before because it really was kind of a game between certain people and us, and if we hadn't put copy protection on, they wouldn't have bought our products because they wouldn't have had any copy protection to break.
Present company accepted.
Not necessarily.
and through the whole time, does 3DO copy protect? I mean, games were always a particular problem in part for this.
You're still trying to address the issue. I mean, it's an interesting challenge, and it's just something about human culture, I think, where everybody. I mean, I just challenge anybody in this room, can you raise your hand and truthfully say you have never, ever violated the copyright law? Go ahead. Wow. Okay, we got one. We got one.
There's Jesus Christ in back there.
And here's the funny thing is that, as many of you know, if you're software people, if you're creative people, you're going to create anyway. You're going to create no matter how much they rip you off, and that's just the way the human condition is. So, I remember one time talking with Don Valentine and saying to him, what do you think about this idea they're going to change the long-term capital gains taxes? Is that going to affect entrepreneurship and startups? Is it going to affect venture capital? He said, no, because the entrepreneurs are going to do the same thing they would have done anyway.
Right.
And it's the same thing with the creative people, and the consumers are going to steal the stuff, and it's just that's just the way it's going to be.
It's the circle of life.
It's true. A lot of those web entrepreneurs didn't have to worry about capital gains.
Like they didn't have any.
Yes. Hi. I'm very interested to go back to the distribution channel question, if I may. How did you develop the distribution channels? How did you generate the sales back then? And the second part is, if you were to go out with a new product today, how would you go to market? What distribution channels would you use? Thank you.
Yeah, both Doug and Tripp, if I remember correctly, created distribution channels for their own products by taking on affiliate labels, and I think you invented affiliate labels. And,
yeah.
Well, even going back to Apple, again, you had to create the channel. And I think entrepreneurially right now, it's a very interesting way to think about things. If you can think of a business that doesn't work any of the existing channels and you can create a new one, even though it's a lot of work, there's a lot of upside potential from doing that. And back at Apple, we had guys that were claiming to be Apple dealers that were actually just operating out of a suburban home, or they were, had a big empty floor in a walk-up unit in New York City where they're burning incense in the middle of the floor, and this is supposed to be a computer dealership. And back in 1979, I did the first ever field training program for any kind of computer, anything with these retail stores, and it was scary what you'd find out there. And you literally, I think, Scott was alluding to the same experience, and maybe Doug had it as well. You had to literally go personally from door to door, store to store, winning over these guys one at a time, just one at a time.
And I just mentioned that, in fact, Apple's doing it again because they've built a chain of Apple stores. There's 60 of them that are supposed to generate $1 billion. It's a problem with creating your own distribution channels. You have to have a lot of money to do it. And we're not supplying it right now. So.
Yeah, I can state authoritatively that we have never created a distribution channel. I have sold only one retailer in my entire life on carrying our products. And that retailer, Computer Factory in New York, is now was bust years ago. But I've never succeeded in selling any retailer who's now in business on carrying our product. The only thing that convinced them was not me, it was customers coming in and asking, demanding. So what I would do to create a distribution channel is get a product so good that people rave about it, get passionate about it, and tell their friends.
But
and
don't
that
give
creates
their friends
demand. And then do direct marketing if you need to help stimulate that.
What was that, Doug, that little soda boat shape?
I think the best word-of-mouth stuff is a two-edged sword because, of course, the same friends that tell their friends about the product usually provide it.
Right here.
Yes, the discussion on distribution channels sort of did into retail, and the medium has changed dramatically. Holy grail of electronic distribution is out there, but has never been successful. What do you think is the possibility of that being a reality?
Or more properly put, will online ever work as a distribution method?
I think it works fine as a distribution mechanism. What's broken is it's really hard to get people to pay. And so you will find it working just terrifically for those parts of the software business that have developed an alternative payment mechanism, like massively multiplayer online role-playing games, which are an enormous business, mostly invisible to people, but operating with 30 to 50% profit margins, many of them with $100 million in revenues, most of it completely invisible to anybody who's not part of that community. They typically distribute their product online, and because they don't care if you give it to your friends, since they're going to take a monthly fee from you, it works just fine. So yes, it's there. It works great. It also works for things that are more in the line of services, ASP model products and so forth, for the same reason. They find a way to move the toll keeper to a different place in the chain. If you're trying to sell conventional, traditional packaged goods software online, the real problem is people don't want to pay for it the same way they pay for in-store product, and trying to fit that into a new distribution vehicle doesn't work very well.
So is that true at Intuit?
Yes, I'd say our big online success is TurboTax for the web, which is massively successful. We get 2 to 3 million taxpayers who use TurboTax for the web. But as Doug said, we've moved the payment point to the end. If you want to file or print, then you have to insert your credit card. But you can use all the software, you can calculate your taxes, but because the software and the tax system requires you to either electronically file or print, we can charge at the end. And that works great, brilliantly. It's a tremendous solution, but it hasn't worked anywhere else. QuickBooks for the web is now gaining momentum and is the largest online accounting system, but it's still smaller than we would have expected at this point, though it's growing at a huge rate. That's been, that may be the sleeper in all this. But I think Doug's on to the main point.
So, Trip, you had a service, I guess, called Meridian 59. What happened to that?
Yeah, that was one of the pioneering massively multiplayer games like Doug was talking about it. And actually, I think it's hard to get people to pay a subscription fee, and there will be better business models in the future where the consumer feels like they're getting something more tangible that feels more like an investment. But to answer the basic question, of course, the online thing's going to work because eventually you're going to have a Cray computer in your hand, and it's going to have all kinds of storage capacity and capability and broadband. So absolutely, inevitably, it's going to be great.
Question in the back with the guy at Pollution.
How much is it going to be the case that to grow consumer software beyond its current levels, we're going to have to be looking at the online model becoming the predominant model? And how much is this going to involve getting people into things like DRM, digital rights management, on a common basis? Or is this wildly farther out in the future? Or are any of you guys betting on that as a part of your growth in the near term?
Well, let's see.
I'm out of business.
No, we're not betting on digital rights management. We executed it so badly, it was a painful lesson for us.
So the real question, let me reinterpret the question, is it possible to start a new consumer software company now in 2003? And if so, I'll be happy to finance it.
Well, probably yes, but not doing what everybody's already doing.
So what would a good idea be? Say there's a young entrepreneur in here who's still got his life in front of him.
No, I think there are models. They're very different from models from 20 years ago, but I really do think that there's an opportunity to create a model that finds a way to pay people for their intellectual content and gain distribution. The distribution can still be partly retail. I mean, it can't be all retail. That doesn't work anymore. And it doesn't all have to be online. It can be partly online with direct physical distribution, too, something people often ignore. But the model that's going to work today is going to be one that takes advantage of the same kinds of interpersonal effects that you're seeing that make very effective websites like eBay or Amazon. Typically, there could be ones in which users reinforce one another. A good example would be there's a company in St. Louis called Punch, which owns the home architecture and design area right now. They get an enormous amount of their punch from the mutual support of their users of one another on their website. They also encourage their users to create add-ons or add-ins like Photoshop and other products do, so that their users are creating the extensibility that takes the product into new market niches. If this sounds a lot like traditional open source, it has characteristics of that, but they're still making money. They're still finding a way to capture value for themselves and for the developers along the way. And I think that's the kind of model that's likely to succeed in this kind of environment. It also has the effect of moving a lot of a traditional publisher's costs in customer service, support, QA, testing, and so forth onto its customer base.
You said earlier that there was no home computer, that it never really happened. Do you think that's starting to change either from the TiVo moving towards a computer or the Microsoft Media Desktop or any of these consoles becoming more and more like computers?
Or maybe like the Macintosh?
Yeah, I suppose because of the entertaining aspects of managing your own video libraries and doing media production and stuff like that, the management of digital assets and audiovisual assets is becoming part of the job of a personal computer in the home. But it's still work.
Yeah.
It's definitely work. It's not play.
You guys agree?
Yeah. I don't know. I think home computer is a word like home electrical generator. I don't think there's a lot of demand for a home electrical generator. What people want are lights, and they want microwave oven, they want cooking, and they want heat in their house, and so I think you got to focus on the ends as opposed to the device. And boy, there's a lot more, computing MIPS in the household now than there was 20 years ago. And they're used for a ton more things. I mean, the most fun I've had with a computer in recent years has been using the iLife suite from Apple. Boy, it's just wonderful what it does in photos, and the kids do movies on it and edit movies and play music. So I think there's maybe there's not a home computer. I don't know what that was, but there's a lot of computing that's been done for ends that people really care about. And all you have to do, I read this, I think, first in a column that Stewart wrote. If you take iLife and you got a bunch of photos and you put them in, and then you pick the best ones and put them in a book, you have and Apple will print this book for you with a third-party vendor. It's one of the neatest gifts you can give people, is this coffee table book that you produced of pictures that you shot of you and your friends. And that's just so cool, and you couldn't do that 4 years ago. So I think there's still a lot of invention that's happening, and it's and people using computers for new things in homes.
I also think that people tend to think of home computer as a low-end computer. The truth is, what most of you folks probably do at home on your computers is you do your email, you browse, and you use it as a typewriter. You use it as a word processor. And I think that the home computer of today, if not tomorrow, is probably a Wi-Fi enabled environment where people can take their laptops anywhere in the house comfortably. How many people walk around their office with their laptop? I think that's a home function. So if you look at Wi-Fi, I see that as that essentially is the absolutely prototypical home environment for computers, if not of the future, already today. And I'll bet half the people in the room have Wi-Fi enabled laptops that they wander all over their homes with.
And
right?
I'd say I'd just add one application to that. They're probably playing illegally acquired music.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Music sharing is a giant use of computers nowadays.
Yeah, these days. We have time for one more question, and this gentleman here is bouncing up and down with a microphone, so he gets it. Make it a good one.
Stuart.
I have a genuine historical question. I'm very interested in...
His story on the upside-down disc.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Very interested in learning when you first realized that the Internet might be something significant, and what your first reactions were as to how it might affect your business and how you might take advantage of it.
So when did you realize the Internet would be a big deal? And be honest.
Well, I can tell you exactly when. We were, during the kind of early days of the Internet, tied up in an acquisition where we were being acquired by another software company, small family-run software company in Redmond. And that deal blew up in May of 1995. We had in early June, first week of June, a board meeting, and my topic that I asked all board members to come in and contribute on was, okay, what did we miss over the last 9 months when we've been slightly distracted? What did we miss? And John Doerr came in with handwritten PowerPoints that acetates that he'd handwritten on this new thing called the Internet. And that was spellbinding. And by then he'd seen Netscape and all that. He had a compelling case. That was in the first week of June, 95. And by September 95, we were out with our first Internet stuff because we were so wild about what he had just presented.
And the acetates were compelling in expressing the value of the
Internet? Yeah, his hand-drawn grease pencil acetates on the Internet were really compelling.
So you didn't actually look at it to get excited by it. Doug?
I don't know, Scott may remember better since he was on my board. I know we talked about it. Probably Scott brought it up as a result of his own thought processes. And for a long time, we were thinking of it purely in terms of the marketing impact that we could have by having a website and maybe an online store where we could sell things to people who came to the website. And we didn't know very much about driving people to a website. So it was never a huge part of Broderbund's business. I think the online store, it did end up contributing $20 or $40 million of revenue at the end. But not in the sense that Scott's talking about fundamental lines of business being Internet-enabled or Internet-oriented. Broderbund's product line really never captured that cast.
And Trip?
Well, actually, I was going to say something about local area networking because of how that originally got introduced to electronic arts, because a few of the engineers wanted to share a printer or something, and then of course everyone else in the building said, "Hey, wait, can I hook up to that?" And it was an incredibly dawning awareness of what incredible power there was from having your computers networked, and not just being able to, of course, share a printer, but being able to message each other and do email. And then the internet, of course, came along and became an extension of that when you could get outside of the building. But I think I don't know. I was too early in thinking about the internet, and I think unable to exploit it because the market wasn't ready. And I think to a large extent, video games on the internet, that's still something that hasn't happened in the way it's going to happen.
Scott, you wanted to ask Doug a question.
Doug has a story that is so worth hearing about something having to do with the upside-down floppy disk.
Of customer service. I'll tell that story. Back in the early days of Broderbund, we got a lot of our product from Japan. And a number of our customers would complain because the games that we got from Japan typically ran sideways on the television screen. And I guess in Japan, people would pick up their little TVs and turn them on their side. And that way they would get a long oblong rather than the sideways one that more adequately reflected the coin-op games that we were ripping off. So somebody, it might have been me, got the bright idea with a game called Karateka that if we could put on the back side of the floppy disk an upside-down version of the game, then when people would call, as they occasionally did, customer support and say, I've got your game, it's great, but it's running upside down on my computer, we could say, you dummy, you'd pull the floppy disk out and turn it over and stick it back in. And if the Computer History Museum doesn't have a copy of Karateka, I'd be happy to provide one, and it is on the backside.
Aha!